Hey Adopter, about 2 weeks ago, an engineer in Anthropic posted that HTML is his new version of Markdown, so to say. It got 4 million views in 1 week, and the same month, a company called Mintlify shipped the exact opposite. They served plain Markdown to AI agents and reported a 30 times cost reduction. Well, guess what? Both are right. Both are winning. Both are arguing for opposite defaults. Which one is correct? In my opinion, neither. And that's the actual story here. Both teams named what they were optimizing for. The Anthropic engineer was reading his own output. He basically wanted it dense, scannable, pretty. And if you know anything about Markdown files, they can be pretty ugly and look like gibberish when you operate within them as a human. But for him, the HTML output was worth the extra cost. Mintlify, on the other end, was paying the bill on behalf of AI agents who are reading their documents. They wanted these agents to read cheaply and efficiently. So those are two different jobs, different choices, and there's no contradiction here at this point. The fight on social media, however, was held on one level above where the decisions were made. People picked the format, then the named players picked the constraint, and let the format follow. That distinction here is the whole essay that I want to talk to you about. And a quick word on what a token actually is if you don't know that concept or that word, since the topic really depends on it. A token is basically the unit, in this case, that the AI charges for. Roughly 4 characters of an English word per token. Every word you put in, every word that it spits out, you pay per token, like a taximeter basically, but for text. And this is the dominant failure mode of AI adoption in 2026. The format fight is where it shows up the loudest. People reach for a maximum because the model supports it, and then they call it strategy. Bigger windows, context windows in this case, richer outputs, more agents in the loop, more tokens through the pipe. None of it is really decided, and all of it is defaulted to. And then it's defended when someone is questioning it. So what do I mean by that? Let me get into this. The honest name for this is token maxing, right? It's what happens when nobody at the table has named that they're actually optimizing against. The default becomes use everything the model will let us use. Feels like progress because the numbers keep going up. And the bill does go up slower than the demo wow factor that you present at your next meeting. And that's why nobody notices it really until the quarterly review. The context window, while we're on it, that's the maximum amount of text that the model can read in one go. Bigger window, more capacity to read in theory. People treat it like extra budget to spend, but it isn't. The opposite camp calls itself token budgeting. So we got token maxing on one side and token budgeting on the other side. And they think that it owns the moral high ground, okay? Cheaper, leaner, more disciplined. But budgeteers who refuse density without saying what density would buy them are making the same mistake going the other way. They picked a number to minimize to and called it strategy. What they're defending isn't the position, it's a vibe. Here's where the case against thoughtless maxing stops being ideological and starts being measured. In April 2026, researchers at ETH Zurich, their SRI lab, tested a thing called agents.md files. All right, those are documents you stick in your code repository to tell your AI coding tools how the project works. The community treats them as best practice. It's like giving a contractor a detailed brief before they start their work. More brief equals better job, right? Well, the researchers ran 438 real coding tasks across 3 different AI coding tools, and the result was the exact opposite of what every operator in the field assumed. AI-generated context files cut task success by 3% and raised costs by over 20%. Listen again. The most common advice in the agent tooling community, followed religiously, was actively making things worse. Not in theory, but peer-reviewed studies. Okay? Real tasks, named models. The mechanism is what Anthropic's applied AI team calls context rot. Every additional token in the window depletes the model's attention budget. Chroma tested 18 frontier models in 2025 and found the same thing. Performance degrades at every length increment. A model with a 1 million token window starts losing accuracy at 50,000 tokens. The window is real, the usable window is smaller, and it shrinks as you fill it. Then there is the Stanford and MIT paper from April 2026. Two findings that should end the maxing argument on their own. First, running the same agent on the same tasks produces up to 30 times variance in token spent. Same model, same input, same job. 30 times the bill just on the luck of a draw, meaning the model can't even predict, and that's the second point, their own token usage. Their self-estimate correlate with reality at 0.39. Barely better than guessing. If the models can't predict what they'll actually spend, the humans operating them definitely can't. Maxing in that environment isn't ambitious. It's flying blind, calling the lack of instruments a feature. So what does budgeting actually mean? It isn't austerity. It isn't picking the smallest model, the leanest format, the shortest prompt. It's the discipline of naming what you're actually optimizing for and letting everything else follow that. As I mentioned in the beginning, the Anthropic engineer named his constraint as visual density on artifacts he personally reads. HTML was the right choice for him in that case. He budgeted. He just budgeted toward density instead of cost. Mintlify named cost on the consuming agent. Markdown was the right pile for them. Same skill, different constraint. Do you get the point? The honest pushback to all of this is that budgeting is harder than maxing. It requires catching, infrastructure most teams haven't set up. Catching, since I'm using that word, just means storing a stable bit of a prompt once so that the model doesn't pay the full price to reread it every single time. Like setting up a coffee order at your local. You don't recite the full thing every morning, they just remember. Okay, done well, caching cuts your input cost by up to 90%. Most teams haven't done that yet. It also requires naming what stays static across requests, which most teams haven't thought about. And it requires measurement, which most teams aren't doing. Telling the market to budget is telling it to do something it has no muscle for yet. That's the real objection here. It doesn't change the answer. Running projects from your email inbox stayed common for a decade after proper project tools existed. Not because email was right, but because the alternative needed people to learn a new way of working. And the skill gap was real and the inbox shipped. Maxing is an email inbox of 2026. It works, it ships, and it also leaves money and reliability on the table that the operators who acquired the skill collect quietly, while the rest argue about format defaults on social media. The skill gap is the problem to solve here, as I always tell you, right? It's not the reason to abandon the position. So, how do you know which mode you're actually in? Here are 3 tests that you can run on your own. Number 1, can you name your primary constraint in one sentence? Not fast and good and cheap. One constraint. Latency floor of 2 seconds, cost ceilings of 50 cents per task, accuracy floor of 95% on your eval set. If you can't say it in one breath, the constraint doesn't exist yet, which means whatever you've picked is a default. Second, have you measured what your current default costs you? Not the per token price, the per task spent, the run-to-run variance, the cache hit rate. If these numbers are vibes, your strategy is a vibe. And then finally, what would you give up to relax the constraint by half? If you can't answer that, you don't have a constraint, you have a preference. The teams in the field that are winning at this aren't fighting about HTML versus Markdown. They're fighting about whether their catching architecture is set up to make the format question irrelevant, whether their retrieval is tight enough that context rot stops mattering, and whether their agent loops have a stop condition that catches the runway before it costs them 4 figures. And retrieval, by the way, while we're at that, it basically just means pulling one of the right snippets from a bigger pile instead of dumping everything in one hopping. Like a research assistant who reads the whole shelf so you only read the paragraph that matters. Don't get me wrong. Format wars get attention because they're visible. The real work is invisible, as so often, right? That's the actual gap between the operators that are winning at this and the operators still arguing about the defaults. So remember that 4 million view posts that I mentioned in the beginning, it wasn't wrong. It also wasn't an universal rule, and you shouldn't take it that way. It was one named operator naming his constraint, choosing accordingly, and then saying so out loud. The mistake is that reading that and adopting his default without doing his work first will put you on the wrong path. Token maxing is what you do when you can't budget. Token budgeting is what happens when you can answer one question. And the skill is the question, not the answer. So here's your homework for the next week. Pick one AI workflow that you run regularly, maybe a weekly report or a coding session, a research tasks, anything, and try to write its primary constraint in one sentence. If you can't, you've found where to start. With that being said, adapt and create, and I'll see you in the next one.